Okay, so today we're going to do 9.1 part 2, which is solving quadratic equations by finding square roots. What they want us to do here is they want us to solve this equation for x. And what we would normally do when we want to solve an equation for x is get x by itself. And you may look here and go, oh, x is by itself, okay? X equals 4. But what is this little symbol right here that tells me x is not by itself? And that would be x squared, or x to the second power. So what I've got to do is I've got to figure out, how do I get x by itself? Now, if I were to give you an equation like this one, 3x equals 6, what you would do is you would go, okay, 3 times x, so what I need to do is the opposite of that, which is division. Divide here, and x equals 2. Because what I need to do in order to solve equation is always inverse operation. Okay, always inverse operation. Well, when I have x squared, who can tell me, does anybody know off the top of your head, what is the inverse of something being squared? Anybody? Huh? Negative. Not negative. Okay, it would be the square root. Okay, so I know that 3 squared is equal to 9. Okay, so if I want to do the square root of 9, then I'm going to get what? 3. So I get the opposite. Does that make sense? Okay, I'll do a few more and it'll help clear it up a little bit. Okay, so when I want to get x by itself, the inverse operation of something being squared is the square root of that. So I'm going to take the square root, which is here, and basically what that does for me is that cancels this out, okay? Because that squared means that I have 2 x's there. If I take the square root of x squared, I'm only going to be left with x. Now, whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. I cannot just take the square root of that side and say, okay, I'm done. I've also have to take the square root of 4. Okay? Who can tell me what the square root of 4 is? 2. Janelle, is it just positive 2? Positive and negative 2. Go ahead and write that little positive negative sign, or you could write out 2 comma negative 2. It's the same thing. I just like to use the sign because I think it's a little bit quicker. Okay, so that's how you solve equations that have something squared. So let's do this one right underneath it. That one was simple enough because 4 had an exact square root. Okay, so let's try to find this x here. What would I do to get x by itself if it's x squared? We just did it in the last example. Square root, very good. Okay, so I'm going to take the square root, which what that does is, is it cancels this out right here, and I'm left with x. Then whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Now, there is no exact square root of 5. 1 times 1 equals 1, 2 times 2 equals 4, 3 times 3 equals 9. So what I'm finding is there's no 2 numbers. Okay, so what you can do is I want you to round your answer to the nearest hundredth. I want you to write it as a decimal. Okay, so go ahead and plug the square root of 5 in your calculator and then press the little button I told you about, which is the arrow going to the left and the right. And what you get on your calculator is 2.23606, and it keeps going. Okay, but if I only want to round to the nearest hundredth, that is this 3 right here, so I look behind it. All right, 6 is 5 or greater, so I know that my answer is going to be 2.24. And that's what x equals. X equals 2.24. Okay? All right, let's go on to this problem here. Exact same type of thing. I want to get x by itself. I see that x is squared. What is the only way to get x by itself when it's being squared? Square root. Very good. So I'm going to take the square root of this, which cancels that out. And I'm going to take the square root of 0. Anybody know what the square root of 0 is? 0, because 0 times 0 equals 0. There's no positive, negative 0 because 0 is only 0. So that is my final answer. All right, Riley, what would I do to get x squared by itself? Square root, very good. So I do square root, that cancels it out. I'm left with x. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Now look at what I have here. I have the square root of -1. Am I ever allowed to have a negative sign underneath the radical or the square root sign? No. So my only option for an answer here is what? Undefined. Very good. So that would be my answer. X equals undefined. Because when there's a negative number over there, that negative sign does not go outside the radical. It stays with the number and goes underneath it. And then I have an undefined answer. All right, let's do the last example now. Now I've got something that's a little more challenging. It's not just as simple as, okay, take the square root of both sides and I'm done. Okay? I'm still trying to get x by itself. Okay, and I want you to solve this as you would if I gave you this equation right here. Okay, if I gave you this equation, 3x minus 48 equals 0, Ajana, what would you do first? Add 48 to both sides. And guess what? That is the exact same thing you're going to do in this equation. All right, you're still going to solve it exactly like you would. I'm still trying to get x by itself, but the only thing is now once I get x by itself, it's not going to really be alone because it's going to be x squared, so I'll have to do one more step. All right, so let's add 48 to both sides. This cancels out here. Add 48 here. 3x squared is equal to 48. All right, Taylor, what am I going to do now? Divide by 3. Very good, because 3 is being multiplied by x, so I do the inverse. And I'm left with x squared is equal to what? 16. Now, is x by itself? No, it is not, okay? So in order to get it by itself, I'm back to that very last step that was just our only step on the last example. What do I do to get x alone? Square root. That cancels this out, square root. So x is going to equal, who knows the square root of 16? 4. And it's not just 4, but positive negative 4. Very good. Now remember, once you do the square root sign, like the square root of 16, you drop the square root sign. You no longer have it. Your answer is just a whole number. Do not keep that square root sign when you get your final answer, because that tells me that you don't really know what it means and that the square root of 4 is not your final answer, because what's the square root of 4? 2. I can keep going. If you write the square root of 2, then I have to plug it in and get a decimal. So I want you to make sure you drop that square root sign once you find it. All right, let's do this last one. Now, this last one's is set up a little bit different. Okay, what do I need to move first? The 27. And Janelle, tell me, is the 27 positive or negative? Positive. It is positive. So the only way to move it to the other side is subtract. Don't let this negative sign here fool you. Okay, so I cancel that out, subtract 27 over here, and now I'm left with negative 3x squared, because every number has a sign, and the sign is directly in front of the number, so I have to keep it, equals negative 27. What am I going to do now? Divide by negative 3. So I divide by negative 3, divide by negative 3, and x squared is equal to positive 9, because two negatives being divided equal positive. And then, Sasha, what am I going to do to get x by itself?
Do the square root.
The square root. Very good. That cancels that out for me. The square root of 9 is what? Positive negative 3. Remember, don't forget that positive negative sign, because if you forget it, then you only have half your answer. Okay? All right, so that ends 9.1 part 2.